For 3 years, I scrubbed the floors of the man I was fated to marry. And for 3 years, I made certain he never found out. I was 25 that winter, and a woman grown long before it, which matters, because the thing I was hiding is the sort of thing the pack takes seriously, only in a woman old enough to understand exactly what it would cost her. The mark had come in 3 winters past. Overnight, the way mate marks come, a dark whirl on the inside of my left wrist, like ink risen up from somewhere underneath. Most girls in the pack would have wept for joy to wake wearing one. I bound mine in linen before the sun was full up, and I have kept it bound, near enough, every day since. Because I knew whose it answered to. There is only one mark in all the Iron Territories, shaped like the one that surfaced on my wrist, and it is the King's. And there is, to my mind, exactly one fate grimmer than scrubbing Alaric of the Iron Territories' floors on my knees in the grey before dawn. It is being claimed by him. You may think that strange, so let me be plain about it while I still sound sensible, because I will not sound sensible for much longer. The last woman the pack whispered might carry the King's mark drowned in the mill pond the spring before I came to the palace. A strong swimmer, a shallow pond. No one said the word murder out loud, but no one needed to, because everyone understood the arithmetic. The King was sworn to a marriage of state. The peace of half the north hung on it. And a fated mate is not a blessing to a king in that position. She is a problem with a heartbeat. Problems with heartbeats do not last long around the mill pond. So I made my decision the morning the mark came in, and I have never once been sorry for it. I would rather scrub his floors free and alive than wear his crown as a target. I wrapped my wrist, I took the lowest post in the palace, and I made myself into the one thing no one ever looks at twice. A maid with a bucket, on her knees, at the edge of the room. It worked beautifully on everyone in that palace. It did not work at all on his wolf. The man never knew me from any other servant. I will swear to that to my last breath. Alaric looked through me for 3 years, the way a king looks through the furniture of his own house. And I was glad of it. And I told myself I was glad of it. And on the mornings I almost believed it. I considered the matter closed. But his wolf had my number from the first week. It started small. The king would come into a room I was cleaning and forget what he had come for. He would stand in a doorway with an order half given and lose the thread of it, frowning as though the room had rearranged itself when he was not looking. Once, in my second year, I dropped a pail on the stair and he crossed half the gallery to right it, before he seemed to understand that a king had just stooped for a maid's spilled water. And he straightened with a face like a man who has caught his own hand in his own pocket. And he did not say one word. And he left at a pace that was trying very hard to be a walk. The court began to notice that the king kept turning up wherever the floors were being washed. I noticed it before the court did, naturally, because I was the floors being washed. I learned his rerouted footsteps the way you learn weather. I learned to keep my bound wrist turned to the wall, my eyes down, my voice gone. Because his wolf could not place what it was reaching for, and I intended to keep it that way until one of us was safely dead of old age. It was, I thought, a manageable arrangement. A king who does not understand why he keeps drifting toward the scullery is a great deal less dangerous than a king who knows. I underestimated, it turns out, the patience of a wolf that has found the one thing in the world it was made to find, and cannot make its idiot of a man understand why. The morning it all came undone began, as these things do, with Lady Verena and a missing ring. Lady Verena was the marriage of state in person, and she wore it like a crown she had not been given yet, but fully intended to collect. Her father's house held the southern passes, her hand held the peace, and she had spent 3 years at court being almost the queen, which is a station that curdles a certain kind of woman, and she was that kind. She had also, I think, noticed the king's drifting feet long before the court put words to it, and she had drawn the conclusion a clever and frightened woman draws, that something in her future husband's house was pulling him off course, and that it would be wise to find out what. She found out by accident, the way the worst things are always found out. The Queen Mother's ring went missing from the solar, an old thing, a heavy ruby, worth a holdfast. It had in fact rolled behind a coffer, as I had cause to learn an hour too late. But Lady Verena did not wait for the coffer to give up its secrets. She wanted a thief, and a thief at court is best chosen from among the people no one will miss. And so she came down to the gallery where I was on my knees with a brush, and she brought half the court behind her to watch. "You," she said, "the floor girl. You were in the solar at dawn." "I clean the solar at dawn every day, my lady." "Then you will turn out your sleeves." I did the sums in the half breath I had. If I refused, I was guilty. If I turned out my sleeves, the right one was nothing, and the left one was the end of my life. I had spent 3 years being invisible against exactly this moment, and I had no plan for it at all, because the whole point of being furniture is that furniture is never asked to roll up its sleeves. I held out my right arm, empty. I kept the left at my side. "Both," said Lady Verena, and when I did not move quickly enough, she did the thing that undid everything. She took my left wrist in her own hand and pushed the cuff back herself, hard, expecting a ruby, and the linen I had bound that morning, in the dark, in a hurry, with cold fingers, came away with the cuff. And there it was, on the inside of my wrist, in the full light of the gallery, in front of half the court of the Iron Territories, and the woman who meant to be its queen. The King's mark. I have had a long time to think about the silence that followed, and I have decided it had 3 parts, like a chord. There was the court silence, which was the silence of a great many people understanding a great many things at once. There was Lady Verena's silence, which was the silence of a woman who has reached into a drawer for a ring and closed her hand on a viper. And there was the King's. He was at the end of the gallery. He had drifted there, of course. He had been drifting toward me for 3 years, and the one morning it mattered, his feet had brought him without his leave. I had not even known he was in the room. I looked up from my own uncovered wrist and found him already looking at it, and the face he made I had never seen on him and have never seen since, because it was the face of a man hearing, all at once, the answer to a question his own body had been screaming at him for 3 years, while his mind insisted there was no question at all. He did not speak. The most feared wolf in the north stood in his own gallery and could not put one word in front of another. His mouth moved. Nothing came. His hand had risen halfway toward me from across the room, as though his wolf had taken the arm hostage, and he was staring at it, and at me, and at the mark, with the particular horror of a man who has just discovered that the floor he has walked across every day of his life was a trapdoor the whole time. I did the only thing left to a woman whose 3 years of careful invisibility had just ended on a gallery floor. I pulled my sleeve down over the mark, got to my feet and said, to the room and to no one, "The ring is behind the coffer in the solar. Behind the coffer. I would check before you hang anyone." And I walked out, past the king who could not speak, with my heart going like a struck drum, and the absolute certainty that I had perhaps a day, 2 if I was lucky, before the mill pond. I underestimated him again. I was getting into a habit of it. He came to the laundry that night, which kings do not do, into the steam and the lie and the dark, and found me where Mistress Pell had hidden me, among the drying linen, because Mistress Pell had been at court the morning the other woman drowned, and had her own opinions about palace arithmetic. He came alone. He stopped a careful distance off, the way I would later learn he did everything that mattered. And for a long moment, the king of the Iron Territories and the floor maid he was fated to marry looked at each other across a rack of wet sheets, and neither of us knew how to begin a conversation 3 years overdue. 3 years, he said at last. It was not quite a question. 3 years, my lord. You hid it from me. His voice did something on the last word. You looked at me every morning across your own bucket, and you let me believe you were no. And the whole time, he stopped. He dragged the heel of his hand down over his eyes, like a man with a wound to bear. My wolf has been out of his mind for 3 years, and would not tell me why. I thought I was losing my grip on the ship. I had the healers bleeding. I thought I was going mad in increments. And you knew. You knew the entire time what was wrong with me, and you said nothing. And you let me bleed. It was an accusation, and it was fair, and I have never in my life been less inclined to apologise for anything. I let you bleed a little, I said, to keep myself from drowning. The last woman who carried your mark did not get to choose between the two. I did. I chose. And I would choose it again, my lord, because being your fated mate in this court is not a gift. It is a sentence. And I had no wish to be the next strong swimmer they pull out of the mill pond. I heard my own voice climb and let it. You want to know why I said nothing? I said nothing because nothing was the only thing in 3 years that kept me alive. Do not stand in my laundry and ask me to be sorry for staying alive. He was quiet a long while. The steam moved between us. No, he said. No, you are right. You owe me no apology, and I have no right to ask you for one. He looked at his own hands, as though they belonged to someone he was disappointed in. My wolf chose you the morning that mark came, and chose without asking me, and you have paid for his choosing for 3 years, while I paid the healers to tell me I was tired. The debt in this room is mine, all of it. He turned to go, and at the rack of sheets he stopped, and he said the thing I was not braced for, because I was braced for grief, and not for this. I am glad you stayed alive, whatever it cost me. I am glad of it. I will not pretend I am not, even now, when I have only just learned what I have been walking past. He left. I stood in the steam with my bound wrist held against me, and discovered, with no small irritation, that the thing I had spent 3 years putting out had not gone out at all. It had only been waiting for someone to stop looking through me long enough to fan it. I should have run that night. I want that understood. I had the coin. I had the coal-hatch knowledge of every servant who has ever needed to vanish. But I had every reason. Instead, I went looking for why a king who had just discovered his own fated mate had spoken to me like a man apologising for a thing he could not undo, rather than a man about to claim what was his. If you have come this far down on your knees with me, stay on the floor a little longer. What I found 3 nights later in the chapel of the Oathstones is the thing I have never told a living soul. And telling it now, I find I would like to be believed. If hers is a voice you would keep company with on a long night, you know the small kindness the bell below is asking. Now, the chapel and the vow. I found it because the healer who had bled him for 3 years had a conscience and too much wine in her, and she told me where to look and what I would find when I looked. The Oath Stones are where the kings of the Iron Territories swear the things that bind a kingdom. And there, cut into the newest stone in the king's own hand, sealed in blood gone black with years, was the vow that had been quietly killing him since before I ever knelt on his floors. I, Alaric, set no fated mate above the peace of the North. Let my wolf be sealed to the sworn bride, and no other, that the war not wake again in my delight. I sat down on the cold chapel floor and understood, far too late, what I had been hiding from for 3 years. He had sworn it after the last war, the healer had told me, when the southern passes ran red, and the only coin that would buy peace was the king's own hand in a marriage of state. He had sworn off his own fate to stop the dying, and the oath had taken him at his word. It had reached into him and sealed his wolf's mate sense shut, blinded the man to the one thing the wolf was built to find, so that he could not be tempted to break the peace for love. It was meant as mercy. It worked like a slow poison. Because a wolf does not stop knowing its mate simply because a man has sworn he must not feel it. The wolf had gone on knowing all 3 years and tearing itself against a seal it could not reach. And the man had felt only the tearing and not the cause, and had bled himself trying to cure a sickness that was not a sickness at all. He had not dismissed me every morning out of coldness. He had been sworn blind. He had walked past his own fate 3,000 times because he had bricked up the window with his own hands to save his people, and his wolf had been howling behind the bricks the whole while, and neither of them could tell him why. The man I had spent 3 years protecting myself from had spent the same 3 years being slowly hollowed out by a sacrifice he made before he ever met me. And the moment that linen came away on the gallery floor, the seal had cracked. Not broken, cracked, because a sealed man cannot unsee his own mate's mark once it is shown to him in full light. That was the speechlessness. That was the hand he could not control. The vow was holding the door shut, and his wolf had just got a claw through the gap, and the 2 halves of him were at war on a chapel floor, and there was no surgeon in the north who could cut the thing free, because the only blade that ends a blood oath is a greater one freely given, and the only thing greater than a vow to save a kingdom is a vow to lose one. I knew then that he would not claim me. Not because he did not want to, because claiming me meant breaking the peace, and breaking the peace meant the war, and he had already drowned 1 woman's worth of the North in that war, and would not buy his own happiness with another flood. He would let the oath hollow him to a husk first. He had as good as told me so in the laundry. The debt in this room is mine. He meant to pay it by enduring, alone, exactly the way men like him always mean to pay everything. Which meant the choosing, in the end, was going to have to be mine. It usually is. Lady Verena reached the same conclusion I had, give or take, and moved a great deal faster on it. She understood, after the gallery, that her marriage of state had a mate mark standing between it and the altar, and she understood that a cracked oath is a frightened thing, and frightened things can sometimes be finished off with a push. If the king's true mate was simply gone, quietly, an accident, a strong swimmer in a shallow pond, then the crack would close, the seal would hold, the wolf would have nothing left to reach for, and the marriage would proceed, and no one would say the word out loud, because no one ever did. She did not use the mill pond. She used the South Road and a cart of her father's men, and a message sent to me in Mistress Pell's name, asking me to meet her past the gate at dusk. And if I had been the floor maid I was 3 years ago, I would have walked straight into it. But I had spent 3 years learning every way out of a palace, which is the same as learning every way a person can be made to disappear from one. I knew that message was wrong before I finished reading it, because Mistress Pell cannot write. and the note was in a clerk's clean hand. And a woman who has kept herself alive by noticing things does not stop noticing them simply because her heart has started getting in the way. I went to the gate at dusk. I did not go alone, and I did not go as prey. I went with Declan, the king's beater, who had watched his king bled by healers for 3 years and wanted very much to know who profited. And I went with the truth folded in my sleeve like a blade. Lady Verina's men were waiting with the cart. Lady Verina was not. She was far too clever to stand in a road beside a crime. But her steward was. And her steward, when Declan's hand closed on his collar, proved a great deal less devoted to the Southern Alliance than his mistress had hoped. It nearly worked all the same. I will tell you that plainly. If the note had been 1 line shorter, if Pell had happened to learn her letters, if Declan had not believed a floor maid over a lady, any one of those, and I would have been a cart's distance gone before the palace woke, and the seal would have closed over the king like ice over a pond, and he would have married his peace and been hollow inside it for the rest of his life and filled with duty. Instead, I walked back through the gate at full dark with a bound steward and the proof of an attempted murder, and I went to find the king, because I had finally understood what I was going to have to do, and I needed him to be standing where the whole court could see him when I didn't. I found him in the great hall, where Lady Verina had convened the court to announce the date of a wedding, which was either very bold or very frightened of her, and I have never decided which. I walked into a room I had not been invited into, a thing I had done exactly once before, on a gallery with a brush in my hand. And this time, I did not keep my eyes down. "My lady has been busy this evening," I said into the hush. I set the bound steward's confession on the high table in front of the king. She sent a cart to the South Road to make the king's fated mate into an accident. She did it to keep an oath sealed that is killing the man she means to marry. I expect she will tell you it was for the peace. I let the room have that. Everything in this court is for the peace. I have noticed that the peace mostly seems to require the deaths of women who are inconvenient to Lady Verina. The hall came apart in noise. Lady Verina's voice rose above it, sharp, lovely, lying, and then stopped because the king had stood. He came down off the dais, and the court parted for him as it had always parted for him, and he crossed the length of the hall to where I stood, and he stopped 1 careful pace away, the way he did everything that mattered, and he held out his hand, palm up, the way you offer something to a creature that has been hurt and may not come. "There is an oath on the stone in the chapel," he said. The hall went silent to hear him. "I swore it to save the North, and it has cost me 3 years of my own wolf, and 3 years of looking through the one person in this kingdom my soul was made to find. I will not pretend to this court that I did not swear it. I will not pretend it was not meant well." His eyes did not leave me. "But I have learned this winter that a man who saves a kingdom by selling off the people inside it has not saved anything worth the name. I am told the only blade that ends a blood oath is a greater one freely given." A breath. "So, freely, in front of you all, that none of you may say I was tricked or bewitched or made to do it, I renounce the marriage of state. I will hold the peace with my hands and my warriors, and my own neck if it comes to it, and not with her life, and not with a vow that bricks up my own heart. Let the South wake the war if it dares. I would rather fight it whole than rule it hollow." It was the most expensive thing I have ever heard a man say. He had just laid the peace of half the North on a table in front of its keepers, and bet it against me, in the open, where it would cost him everything if it went wrong, so that no one could ever say he had been anything but clear-eyed when he chose. And Lady Verina, who had everything to lose and had just lost it, made the last mistake of her time at court. "The oath will not let you," she said, too quickly, triumphant and shaking. "It is sealed in blood. It cannot be unmade by a pretty speech. He will collapse before he reaches the chapel. I have seen what the breaking does." She stopped, because no one had said anything about what the breaking does. And the whole hall heard a woman who had sworn she knew nothing of the oath name, in her own frightened voice, exactly what it would cost to break it. I did not raise my voice. I have learned, over 3 long years on my knees at the edges of rooms, that the quiet thing cuts deeper than the loud one. "You have seen what the breaking does," I said. "How interesting, my lady, that you have studied the cost of a thing you swore not to know existed." Then I walked to the chapel, and the court followed, and the king followed, and I did the thing I had decided to do on the cold floor 3 nights before. A blood oath is ended by a greater one freely given, and I was the only soul in the north who could give it, because I was the only one the oath had been built to keep him from. He could renounce the marriage with words. He could not break the seal. The seal was in his blood, and his blood was the thing it held shut. But the mark on my wrist was the other half of the same fate the oath had bricked up. And what a wolf's vow seals against a mate can answer in kind. I unwound the linen from my wrist in front of the oath stones, and I held the uncovered mark to the black sealed blood in the stone. And I gave the only vow greater than a vow, to save a kingdom. "I set this man above my own safety," I said, which I had not done in 3 years, and was terrified to do now. Above the mill pond, above the cart on the south road, above the good sense that kept me alive. Let his wolf come home. The stone fought me. I had not expected it to fight, though I should have. A thing sealed in blood does not give up its grip for the asking. The cold came up out of the stone, and into the mark and up my arm, the old oath refusing to die, and the mark on my wrist split and bled, the way it had not bled since the morning it came in, blood running black where it met the stone, and the cold drove into the centre of me, looking for something to take in the king's place, the way it had taken 3 years of him. The air went to glass in my lungs. Frost crawled up my sleeve. One step back and it would let me go, and seal shut again, and he would be hollow forever and safe. And I would be alive, and we had both had quite enough of being safe and hollow and alive apart. I did not step back. I have always been better at holding on than anyone gave me credit for. I held my bleeding wrist to the stone, and I said his name. Alaric, not my lord, the way you say a name to a person you have decided to keep. And across the chapel, I felt the seal give, all at once, like ice going off a pond in spring. And his wolf came home through 3 years of brick and frost, to the mark that had been waiting on a floor maid's wrist the whole time. And the cold went out of me in a rush, and left me shaking, and emptied, and entirely, finally, claimed. What the kiss was, I will tell you once, and keep the rest. He crossed the chapel, and took my bleeding wrist in both his hands, as though it were the more precious for what it had cost, and bent his head to me, and in it was 3 years of a man looking through the one face he was made to find, finally allowed to see it. That is all. The rest is mine, and his, and the unwound linens, which I have never found again. Lady Verena did not leave that chapel a free woman. She had named the cost of the oath in front of the court that had watched her swear ignorance of it. and a steward's confession lay on the high table, with her seal on the cart that carried it. And there is no pretty speech that walks a person back from an attempted murder witnessed by half the North. Her father's alliance dissolved before the chapel candles guttered. She was sent south, past the passes her house had held, into the keeping of the very war her marriage was meant to prevent. And the war, as it happened, did not wake. The South had wanted the peace more than it had wanted Verena's family to broker it. The alliance reformed within the season around a cousin with cleaner hands and no interest at all in mill ponds. Alaric held the North whole, exactly as he said he would. And the only thing he lost in the breaking was the hollowness. The fracture took longer to close than the oath did. A king who renounces a marriage of state for a floor maid does not wake to a tidy court. There were houses that muttered, advisors who tallied the risk he had run, old wolves who could not decide whether they had watched a king come to his senses or lose them. Alaric let them mutter. He had spent 3 years being bled by healers to keep a peace that was eating him alive, and he had decided, somewhere in a cracked chapel, that he was finished spending himself to be the kind of king who looks through people. Let them say a floor maid undid me, he said once, watching the muttering houses from a high window. She did. She has been undoing me from the edge of every room I walked into for 3 years. I only wish I had noticed sooner. I would have spent the time better. It is a year on now, and I am writing this from a solar that is mine, where a ruby ring once rolled behind a coffer and started the unmaking of everything I had built to keep myself small. They made me loom in the great hall before the same court that watched a lady try to turn me into an accident. And I wore the title the way I once wore the linen, except that the linen was to hide a mark, and the title is to show one. I keep my left sleeve pushed back now, on purpose. The whole North can see the king's mark on me, who scrubbed his floors for 3 years. And the seeing of it is a thing I find I enjoy a great deal more than I ever enjoyed being furniture. He still drifts toward whatever room I am in. He cannot help it. His wolf has 3 years of habit and no longer any reason to fight it. And I will be at some perfectly ordinary task and look up to find the king of the Iron Territories has wandered in with an order half given and lost the thread of it entirely. He says it is a matter of state. It is never a matter of state. I have stopped correcting him. A man is allowed to keep one small fiction if it is a fond one, and the truth, which we both know, is louder than the fiction anyway. His feet have been bringing him to me since before either of us understood why, and now that we do, he sees no reason on earth to ask them to stop. So tell me, did you guess what he was hiding before I did? Down there on my knees, sleeve turned to the wall. Or did the oath fool you, the way it fooled the both of us, into thinking the man was cold when he had only been sworn blind? Stay a while in the comments and tell me where you are listening from tonight. I read every one, by candlelight, in a solo with the sleeve pushed back. And if you want to know what comes next out of the Iron Territories, you know where the bell is. Ring it and stay with me. There is always one more mark someone is keeping hidden, and sooner or later, the light always finds it.